Hello and welcome to Church at Home 2018. I'm Father Ed Estak, as I'm sure most of you know, and I am coming to you from our beautiful church, and I am coming to your home. I am especially grateful to your host and your facilitators that have welcomed you to their home so that we might enter into this Lenten journey that we call Church at Home. I know many of you participated in this great Lenten formation program last year, and I am delighted that you have planned to join again this year. A special word of welcome to those of you that are new to the Church at Home process. Please know that this sharing of our faith in the context of our friendship in the church is key to our call to holiness and kindness and generosity. Bringing up kindness and holiness and generosity, of course, reminds me, and I'm hoping it reminds you, of our Vision 2020. Add one, holy, kind, and giving. We are given the opportunities in our parish in these days to take one small step toward kindness, toward holiness, and toward generosity. I certainly see this Church at Home journey this Lent as one small, doable, possible step toward holiness and toward the kindness built up among us. So I thank you for joining with my brother priests on these video presentations. Each week we will be looking into the letter of St. Paul from the Sunday's reading. I want you to listen with me, and I invite you to listen with me to this invitation to share, to give ourselves away, to lay down our lives. And we do that most powerfully in this Church at Home journey by sharing our faith. So welcome again, and God bless you in this Church at Home.
Hello everyone, good to see you again. Let me introduce Timmy. Timmy will be with us this Lenten journey 2018. So Timmy, say hi. Hi. Timmy is our new STEM member and St. Albert the Great from late last year. He looks like a bear. So you may think what he can do that as a STEM member. So maybe you think he is just a stuffed animal, or he is just foolish, he can do nothing. However, Timmy can do so many things. He is very cute, and we all love to see him at the office. And he can replace someone who is away the office. Especially, Timmy helps me a lot when I go to the church or school. He takes my office chair. Timmy never complains and always smiles like this way. He is a great co-worker, isn't he? Brothers and sisters, people outside of the church may think we Christians are foolish because we love to share hours and time and do an act of charity and make sacrifices for not ourselves but for our family and neighbor. However, I am pretty sure that is what our God wants for us. Do not hesitate to be foolish.
If I was in charge, have you ever thought about that? What you would do differently if you were in charge, whether it be of this country, of this state, of this city, of this parish, of the place where you work, of your school, of wherever. And we probably all have, in some way, shape, or form, thought what we might change if we were the man or we were the woman who had the authority, if we had the power, if we were the one that made the decisions. But we don't really do that, I think, with our workplaces or governments or people like that. we also sometimes can do that very thing in our faith and think, if I was in charge, if I was the one who was figuring out how things were going to work, I'd do some things a little bit differently. You know, our second reading for this third Sunday of Lent, St. Paul is writing to the Corinthians, and he calls Christ a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. And what he's saying is the Jews, the Gentiles, they had seen and they had experienced Christ in the way that he came and the things that he had done and the ways that he had interacted with the people, and eventually his suffering and death on the cross. And this picture that they had of what the Christ would be, how he would look, what he would do, how he would come, and how he would, do what he did, what they had seen did not match up with what they had expected. They did not expect the Messiah to be one who was scorned and beaten and rejected. They did not expect the Messiah to be one who would die on the cross. So they were still struggling to understand how this was all supposed to work. Was this really the Messiah? This seemed like a stumbling block, like foolishness, that this Messiah would suffer and be rejected and be crucified. But there are times too where we do the same thing, where we see how God's plan, we see how God's working comes into our lives, and we're left scratching our heads. We're left wondering, God, what is going on here? There's times where the way God works in our lives, the way God's plan unfolds itself seems to us like a stumbling block or like foolishness, where it doesn't make sense. Where, what, why, when, how God is working. We know that God works. We have that faith that God is working, that God is active, that God is present in our lives. But we don't always know. We don't always understand the how and what, when, where, why of that, how that happens. We have our dreams. We have our expectations. We have certain ways that we expect God to answer our prayers, certain times, certain ways that we expect that to happen, but it doesn't always happen that way. God's way, God's plan doesn't always conform itself. God doesn't always conform himself to our way of approaching things, to our way of thinking, to our expectations, our plans, our hopes, and our dreams. There's no instruction book. There's no game plan cluing us into, well, this is how this prayer is being answered because eventually this is going to happen, or this is how this plan, this answer fits into God's overall plan. And sometimes we see the event, we see the way the prayer is answered or seemingly unanswered, and we're left wondering, God, what's going on here? How the heck is this part of your overall plan for me or my family or my parish or our world? Even though we have 2,000 years of history to go back on, even though we have the Gospels, the prayers, the church, the Mass, we're still left in our own prayer lives praying and saying, God, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and nothing seemed to happen. I prayed for my loved one to recover and they didn't. They died. I prayed for this job for myself, my spouse, my son, my daughter, for a friend, and it never materialized. I prayed for my child to come back to the church and they still haven't. We want to have faith. We want to have that deep faith, but sometimes when we look and we struggle to understand where everything is going, how everything is fitting into God's plan, it makes it tough. It would be much easier. It'd be much easier if God sort of clued us in. If God gave us sort of hints as to where and how he was leading us, but he doesn't. But faith, my brothers and sisters, faith isn't about us, God conforming himself to our way of thinking, but God doing things the way we expect him to, but about us opening ourselves to God's plans, to God's expectations, to God's way of thinking and doing things. It's a way that won't always make sense. There will be times where you and I are left scratching our heads, wondering how this is part of God's plan. There'll be times that seem like foolishness, that appear to be stumbling blocks for us in our faith. But as we prepare in this Lent to walk the way of Calvary with Christ, as we prepare to embrace his cross and our own crosses, we remember that we are called as people of faith to walk that way with Christ, even when that path may be difficult, even when it may be different than the one that we had chosen. Who is really in charge? Is it us, Or are we allowing God to be the one who directs and shapes our lives?
Hello, and welcome to this first session in this first week of Church at Home. We have heard proclaimed in our home meeting today Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. The heart of that proclamation is that Paul says to the Corinthians, we proclaim Christ crucified. You know, this cross, this crucifixion of our God is the centerpiece not only of our churches, it is also the centerpiece of our Christian faith. And I don't mean just the artwork or the statue or the medal around our neck. What I am meaning by the crucifixion of Jesus Christ being the centerpiece of our Christian faith is that this freedom to lay down our life for the sake of others. This is counterintuitive. It goes against what we normally or naturally would believe and think, especially in our broken human condition. Instead of laying down our lives, sacrificing for the sake of others, we are often encouraged and tempted to assert ourselves and to place ourselves before others, to dominate others, to control others. We even do it in our conversations. That's important in our first week of Church at Home because we are being invited to have a conversation in faith. And this model of crucifixion, Christ crucified, is a model for our conversation. A conversation, if you're going to have one, depends on two, at least, people interacting. One who is speaking and the other who is listening. I don't know that it's typical for us to consider our willingness to share in conversation as a crucifixion, a sacrifice. I know I've heard from a lot of people, and most people, especially if they have to do it in front of others, that we really are hesitant to share our faith. It's not easy. It is no uncertain crucifixion. We need to die to our fears, die to our isolation, die to ourselves, and be willing to lay down our lives with the truth of our lives and the truth of our faith. So, on this first week of Church at Home, I'd like you to consider your call to conversation in faith as maybe a little crucifixion. I hope you have a great conversation. Go ahead and share your faith.